The Galactic Council had existed for 12,000 years. It was a gathering of over 400 different species from across the stars. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had watched wars burn across entire star systems. They had witnessed the birth and death of civilizations too many to count. But in all that time, through all the chaos and conflict that shaped the galaxy, one rule remained constant. One warning was passed down through every generation, carved into the walls of every council chamber, whispered in the nurseries of every world: never wake the humans. Ambassador Kethra stood before the assembled delegates in the great chamber. Her scales shimmered with colors that shifted between blue and purple as the light of 3 artificial suns touched her skin. She was old by Valorian standards, nearly 300 cycles, and she had seen many terrible things in her long life. But nothing had prepared her for the news she carried today. The chamber was vast, designed to hold representatives from hundreds of worlds. Beings of every shape and size filled the curved seats that rose toward the domed ceiling. Some breathed oxygen. Others required methane or chlorine. A few existed as pure energy, their forms flickering like flames in specialized containment fields. They came from different worlds with different histories and different gods, yet they all shared one thing in common. They all knew the old stories about humans. Kethra raised her hand for silence. The translation devices embedded in every seat converted her words into 1,000 different languages simultaneously. A mining vessel has made a discovery near the edge of charted space, she announced. Her voice trembled slightly despite her best efforts to control it. They found a ship. An ancient ship. It bears markings that match the old texts. Murmurs spread through the chamber like waves on a disturbed pond. They have found the Ark. The murmurs became shouts. Species that had warred against each other for millennia now looked at one another with shared terror in their eyes. The Krethians, whose empire spanned 300 worlds, sat rigid with fear. The Zoreth Collective, a hive mind that had conquered half a spiral arm, pulsed with agitation. Even the energy beings of the 7th dimension flickered with obvious distress. High Arbiter Zenvox called for order. He was ancient, even by galactic standards, a crystalline entity who had served on the council for over 2,000 years. His body caught the light and scattered it into rainbows as he moved to the central platform. "We must dispatch a fleet immediately," he declared. "The Ark must be destroyed before the humans learn what they truly are." Far from the council chamber, at the very edge of known space, a research vessel called the Endeavor held position near the discovered ship. Dr. Emma Walsh stood at the observation window, unable to believe what her eyes were showing her. The ancient vessel was enormous, nearly 50 kilometers long, its hull covered with symbols that seemed to glow with their own inner light. "This is impossible," she said quietly. Lieutenant Daniel Carter stood beside her, running calculations on his handheld scanner. His brow was creased with concentration and confusion in equal measure. The readings made no sense according to everything he knew about physics and metallurgy. "The metal composition does not match anything in our database," he reported. "Emma, this ship is at least 50 million years old. Maybe older. And look at these symbols. They match the fragments we found in the caves beneath Antarctica, the ones that predated every known human civilization." Emma pressed her palm against the cold glass of the window. She had spent her entire career studying the mystery of human origins. The official story said that humans had evolved on Earth over millions of years, slowly developing from primitive ancestors into the species that now spread across 100 colony worlds. But there had always been gaps in the record. Strange artifacts that did not fit, ancient structures that seemed too advanced for their supposed age. Nathan Price, the ship's communications officer, rushed onto the bridge with panic written across his young face. "Captain wants you both in the briefing room now," he said breathlessly. "We have been receiving transmissions from the Council. They are sending a fleet. 27 warships. They should arrive within 2 cycles." "Why would the Council send warships to a research site?" Emma asked. Nathan shook his head. "I do not know. But the captain intercepted some of their internal communications. They keep using a word I have never heard before. They call it the Awakening, and they sound terrified." Daniel and Emma exchanged worried glances. They had both felt something strange since arriving at this site. A tingling at the base of their skulls. Dreams filled with images they could not explain, whispers in a language they almost understood. The briefing room was small and cramped, designed for function rather than comfort. Captain Maria Santos stood at the head of the table with her arms crossed, and deep worry lines etched into her forehead. She was a practical woman who had served in space for 30 years. She did not believe in legends or prophecies, but the messages she had intercepted were forcing her to reconsider many things she thought she knew. "The Council is afraid of something," she told her officers. "Something about this ship. Something about us. About humans." "That is absurd," Daniel said. "Humans are one of the youngest species in the galaxy. We have only been part of the Council for 200 years. What could they possibly fear from us?" Maria pulled up a holographic display showing the intercepted transmissions. The words scrolled past in dozens of alien languages, but the translation software rendered them into English. Emma read them with growing unease. "Do not let them enter the ship. The sleepers must not wake. If the humans remember what they were, all will be lost." "What does that mean?" Nathan asked. "What sleepers? Remember what?" Emma stared at the ancient vessel through the briefing room's small window. The symbols on its hull seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. She did not understand why, but she felt certain of one thing. "We need to get inside that ship," she said, "before the Council fleet arrives. Whatever they are trying to hide from us, we have a right to know the truth." Captain Santos considered this for a long moment. She thought about her orders, her duty, her career. Then she thought about the fear in those Council transmissions. Fear was a powerful motivator, powerful enough to make 400 species agree on something for the first time in recorded history. "Prep the shuttle," she ordered. "We go in now." The shuttle crossed the gap between the Endeavour and the ancient vessel in silence. Emma sat near the front, watching the massive ship grow larger through the viewport. Up close, the symbols carved into its hull were even more striking. They seemed to shift and change as she looked at them, forming patterns that tugged at something deep in her memory. Daniel checked his equipment for the 10th time. He had brought every scanner and sensor he could carry. Whatever secrets this ship held, he intended to document them properly. Nathan sat in the back, nervously tapping his fingers against his knee. He was young, barely 25. And this was only his second deep space assignment. Nothing in his training had prepared him for anything like this. The shuttle found an opening in the hull that seemed designed to receive smaller craft. The ancient docking mechanism still functioned perfectly after 50 million years, guiding them into a vast hangar bay. Lights flickered on as they touched down, responding to their presence with surprising awareness. "The ship knows we are here," Emma whispered. They stepped out onto a floor made of something that looked like metal but felt almost warm beneath their boots. The air was breathable, somehow maintained across all those countless years. Daniel's scanner showed oxygen and nitrogen in the exact proportions that humans required. "This makes no sense," he muttered. "How could they know what atmosphere we would need?" Emma did not answer. She was walking forward, as if pulled by an invisible thread, drawn toward a massive door at the far end of the hangar. The symbols on its surface glowed brighter as she approached. When she raised her hand toward it, the door slid open without a sound. The corridor beyond stretched into darkness. But as they walked, lights appeared to guide their way. It felt less like exploring an abandoned ship, and more like being welcomed home after a long absence. They walked for nearly an hour, passing through chambers filled with technology beyond their understanding. Machines that seemed to bend light itself. Screens showing star maps of galaxies that no longer existed. Everything preserved in perfect condition, waiting. Finally, they reached a central chamber so vast that its ceiling disappeared into shadow. And there, they found the sleepers. Thousands of preservation pods lined the walls, stacked in rows that climbed higher than they could see. Each pod contained a figure in perfect stasis. These figures were humanoid in shape, but they were not like any humans that Emma and Daniel had ever seen. They stood nearly 8 feet tall. Their bodies were covered with what looked like organic armor, smooth and elegant. Faint patterns of light pulsed beneath their skin, running along pathways that suggested some kind of biological circuitry. "The precursors," Daniel said in a voice barely above a whisper. Emma felt tears forming in her eyes, though she did not fully understand why. She knew about the precursors. Every species in the galaxy knew about them. They were the ancient ones who had shaped the cosmos itself. They had created the hyperspace lanes that allowed faster-than-light travel. They had terraformed thousands of worlds to support life. They had ended something called the First Darkness, a catastrophe so terrible that no records remained to describe it. Then they had vanished. Disappeared without explanation roughly 50 million years ago. Every species in the galaxy had wondered what happened to them. Had they died out? Had they transcended physical form? Had they left for another dimension? Now Emma knew the truth. They had not vanished at all. They were human, she said. The precursors were human. In the center of the chamber stood a console unlike anything else on the ship. It was simple in design, just a raised platform with a smooth surface that seemed to ripple like water. Emma walked toward it without thinking, her feet carrying her forward while her mind raced to catch up. "Emma, wait," Daniel called out. "We do not know what that will do." She stopped at the edge of the platform and looked back at her friends. Something was happening inside her. Memories that were not her own were stirring in the depths of her consciousness. Voices calling across millions of years. "I think I do know," she said softly. "I think I have always known." She placed her palm against the console. Light exploded through the chamber. Emma gasped as information flooded into her mind faster than she could process. Images and sounds and emotions cascaded through her awareness, like a river breaking through a dam. She saw the rise of human civilization, not on Earth, but across 1,000 worlds simultaneously. She saw them evolve beyond the limits of flesh, developing abilities that seemed like magic to lesser species. She saw them unite into a collective consciousness that could reshape reality itself, and she saw why they chose to sleep. The ancient humans had become too powerful. Their minds working together could end all conflict with a single thought. They could impose perfect order on the entire galaxy. No more war. No more suffering. No more chaos. But to do this, they would have to override the free will of every other species. They would have to become tyrants, however benevolent their intentions. They refused. Instead of becoming gods who controlled everything, they chose to diminish themselves. They suppressed their own abilities. They altered their own genetics to make themselves weaker. They scattered their descendants across the cosmos and erased all memory of what they had been. They became small and soft and mortal, but they left behind a safeguard. The Ark was designed to monitor the galaxy. If war and destruction ever reached a point where all life was threatened, it would wake them. Not as conquerors, but as something else. Something the old memories did not quite explain. Emma pulled her hand away from the console and fell to her knees. She was breathing hard and her skin was hot to the touch. Daniel rushed to her side and helped her stand. "What happened?" he demanded. "What did you see?" Before she could answer, Nathan's voice crackled over their communicators. "We have a problem. The Council fleet just arrived early. They are charging weapons. They are going to fire on the Ark." Emma looked at the thousands of sleepers surrounding her. She thought about the sacrifice they had made. They had given up godhood so that others could be free. And now, those others wanted to destroy them out of fear. "They do not understand," she said. Her voice sounded different now, layered with harmonics that had not been there before. "They have been afraid for 12,000 years, afraid of what we might become." The ship shuddered as the first weapon struck its hull. "What do we do?" Daniel asked. Emma's eyes began to glow with soft golden light as the dormant genes inside her started to wake. "We show them they have nothing to fear. We show them what humanity really is." The Ark responded to her thoughts. Ancient systems came alive after 50 million years of silence. And across the galaxy, something began to stir. The Council fleet filled the void around the Ark like a swarm of angry insects. 27 warships from 12 different species, their weapons charged and ready. Admiral Vethnor of the Krethian Empire commanded from the bridge of his flagship, watching the ancient vessel on his display screens with cold determination. "All ships, fire at will," he ordered. Beams of concentrated energy lanced across space. Missiles filled with plasma warheads streaked toward their target. Enough firepower to crack a small moon struck the Ark's hull in a single devastating volley. The ancient ship did not even scratch. A shield of impossible geometry expanded outward from the Ark, catching every blast and every missile. The energy did not dissipate. It did not bounce back. Instead, it transformed, converting from destructive force into something else entirely. A pulse of light erupted from the shield and spread across space faster than anything natural had ever moved. Vethnor watched his sensors go haywire as the pulse passed through his ship without causing any damage. His tactical officer looked up with confusion written across his scaled face. "Admiral, the pulse is spreading. It has already left our sensor range. At this rate, it will reach every corner of the galaxy within hours." "What is it?" Vethnor demanded. "What did we just unleash?" Inside the Ark, Emma stood at the center of the great chamber with her arms spread wide. Light flowed through her body like water through a riverbed. The ancient systems of the ship had connected to her consciousness, using her as a focal point for something that had been waiting 50 million years to happen. Daniel grabbed her shoulders and tried to shake her out of her trance. Her skin was warm to the touch and growing warmer by the second. The patterns of light that ran beneath the skin of the sleepers were now visible beneath her own skin. "Emma, what did you do?" She opened her eyes and looked at him. Her irises had turned gold, filled with depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies. "I sent a message," she said. "Not to the sleepers here. To every human in the galaxy. To everyone who carries our blood, our genes, our legacy." Nathan's voice came through the communicator, filled with panic. "Something is happening on the Endeavor. The crew is collapsing. All of them. Captain Santos just fell unconscious. And on Earth, it happened in the space of a heartbeat. Millions of people dropped where they stood as the signal reached them, in cities and villages, in homes and offices, in every corner of the planet where humans lived. They fell into a sudden sleep. But it was not truly sleep. It was remembering. Megan Torres was piloting a cargo vessel called the Starling when the signal found her. One moment she was checking her navigation charts. The next she was somewhere else entirely. She stood on a world that no longer existed, looking up at a sky filled with colors that human eyes had not seen in 50 million years. A voice spoke to her, ancient and gentle, and somehow familiar. "Remember what you were. Remember what you chose to forget." Images flooded her mind. She saw the rise of human consciousness across the cosmos. She saw the wars they had ended, the worlds they had saved, the darkness they had driven back. She saw the terrible power they had developed and the wisdom that led them to surrender it. She saw ancestors who had loved their descendants so much that they made themselves small to give them the gift of freedom. When Megan woke, tears were streaming down her face, but she was not alone anymore. She could feel them now. Every human, everywhere, connected through a network of consciousness that stretched across the stars. Billions of minds, all sharing the same memory, all understanding the same truth. "We were gods," she whispered, "and we chose to become mortal." Across the galaxy, the awakening spread. On colony worlds orbiting distant stars, human settlers rose from their visions with new awareness burning in their eyes. On military vessels patrolling the borders of contested space, human soldiers looked at their weapons with sudden disgust and set them aside. On space stations where humans and aliens worked side by side, the humans turned to their colleagues with expressions that mixed sorrow and hope in equal measure. Admiral Vethnor watched his sensor displays with growing horror. His ships had been tracking human biosigns throughout the region. Now, those biosigns were changing. Neural activity was synchronizing across impossible distances. Biological patterns were aligning in ways that defied every known law of physics. "They are connecting," his science officer reported. "Every human we can detect. Their brainwaves are matching. They are becoming one." Vethnor had studied the ancient texts when he was young. He knew the old prophecies that every species had passed down through the generations. The stories spoke of a day when humanity would remember its true nature, when the small and soft and mortal creatures would reclaim the power they had abandoned, when the children of the precursors would wake from their long dream. The prophecies called it the awakening. And they said that when it happened, nothing would ever be the same. Signal all council forces, Vethnor ordered. His voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. Stand down. Power down all weapons. Cease all hostilities immediately. Sir, the Zorath Collective will never agree to that. They will see it as weakness. The Zorath Collective no longer matters, Vethnor replied. None of our wars matter anymore. The humans are awake. They could destroy us all with a thought if they chose to. Our only hope is to show them that we mean no harm. Inside the Ark, the sleepers remained in their pods, undisturbed by the chaos outside. Whatever was happening, it did not require them to wake. The descendants were handling it themselves. Emma stood at the center of the collective consciousness, a focal point for billions of awakening minds. She felt their confusion and their wonder. She felt their fear as they struggled to understand what they were becoming. And she felt their hope as they realized that this power came with a choice. They could use this gift to dominate. They could impose their will on every species in the galaxy. They could end all conflict forever by simply deciding that it should end. Or they could do what their ancestors did. They could choose mercy over power, freedom over control, trust over fear. We are not here to conquer, Emma said, and her voice reached every human mind across the cosmos. We are not here to judge. We are here to remember who we were, so we can decide who we want to become. The galaxy held its breath and waited for humanity's answer. 3 days passed after the awakening. Across the galaxy, weapons fell silent. Warships that had been locked in battle broke off their engagements and retreated to neutral space. Armies that had been preparing invasions stood down from their positions. Conflicts that had burned for centuries suddenly stopped. No one ordered the ceasefire. It simply happened. Every species understood without being told that something fundamental had changed. The humans were awake now. The children of the precursors had remembered their heritage, and no one knew what that meant for the rest of the galaxy. Daniel Carter stood on the observation deck of the Endeavour, staring out at the stars he had loved since childhood. Everything looked the same as it always had. The same distant suns, the same swirling nebulae, the same infinite darkness between the points of light. But nothing felt the same anymore. He could sense them now. Billions of human minds, all connected through a network that defied physical distance. Their thoughts brushed against his consciousness like gentle waves lapping at a shore. He knew what they were feeling because he felt it too. Wonder at the scope of their inheritance, fear at the responsibility it carried, and a deep uncertainty about what they should do next. The power was real. He could feel it humming in his bones, waiting to be used. With enough concentration, with enough minds working together, they could reshape matter itself. They could heal wounds, they could cure diseases, they could terraform worlds with a thought. They could also destroy. They could reach across light years and stop a heart from beating. They could crush fleets. They could crack planets. The ancient humans had faced this same choice. They had looked at the galaxy and seen all its suffering. They had the power to end it. All of it. No more war. No more hunger. No more pain. All they had to do was take control. Force every species to behave. Remove the freedom that led to conflict. They refused. Emma joined Daniel on the observation deck. Her transformation had progressed further than most. The organic circuitry that now ran beneath her skin pulsed with soft blue light. Her eyes still held that golden glow, though it had dimmed somewhat since the initial awakening. The other species are waiting, she said. They want to know what we are going to do. They expect us to deliver judgment. Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Judgment. They think we are going to punish them for 12,000 years of war, for attacking the Ark, for trying to keep us asleep. Can you blame them? If our positions were reversed, would we expect mercy? Daniel thought about that question seriously. He searched the collective consciousness, and found memories that stretched back millions of years. He saw what the galaxy had been like before the precursors diminished themselves, a place of order and peace, yes, but also a place without growth, without struggle, without the chance to fail or succeed on your own terms. Our ancestors could have created paradise, he said slowly. But paradise without choice is just a prettier prison. Laura Bennett entered the observation deck. She was older than Emma and Daniel, a school teacher from a colony on the Outer Rim who had never expected to matter in the grand scheme of things. Yet something about her perspective had resonated through the collective consciousness. Her thoughts had spread like ripples on still water, touching minds across the galaxy. People are scared, Laura said. Not just the aliens. Humans too. They feel this power inside them, and they do not know what to do with it. Some of them want to use it. They say we should fix everything, end all the wars, feed all the hungry, heal all the sick. And the others? Emma asked. The others remember why our ancestors chose to sleep. They understand that some things cannot be fixed from the outside. That growth requires struggle. That freedom means the freedom to make mistakes. The debate had been raging through the collective consciousness since the awakening. Billions of minds sharing their perspectives, their fears, their hopes. There was no leader directing the conversation, no authority declaring what humanity should do, just an endless exchange of thoughts and feelings, slowly moving toward something that might be called consensus. Daniel had added his voice to that conversation. He argued for restraint, for trust, for giving the other species the same gift that their ancestors had given them, the gift of choosing their own path. They tried to destroy us, some responded. They kept us ignorant for 12,000 years. Why should we show them mercy? Because mercy is what makes us human, Daniel replied. Not the power. Not the technology. Not the genetic modifications. The choice to be kind when cruelty would be easier. That is what defines us. The Galactic Council requested an audience. It was the first time in recorded history that all 400 species had agreed on anything unanimously. They wanted to meet with humanity's representatives. They wanted to know their fate. Emma was chosen to speak for humanity, though she made clear that she was not a leader. She was simply a voice. The collective consciousness would speak through her, but the words would belong to everyone. She entered the great council chamber alone. The assembled delegates watched her with eyes and sensors and perception organs of every description. Fear filled the room like a physical presence. She could taste it on her tongue. She could feel it pressing against her enhanced senses. High Arbiter Zen Vox addressed her first. His crystalline form flickered with obvious nervousness. The humans have awakened, he said formally. The prophecies have come true. We submit ourselves to your judgment. Emma looked across the sea of alien faces. She saw species that had warred against each other for millennia. She saw empires that had risen through conquest and domination. She saw beings who had done terrible things in the name of survival or pride or simple greed, and she saw herself reflected in all of them. Humans had done terrible things too. Before the awakening. After the awakening. Even the ancient precursors had nearly become tyrants before they chose another path. You expected conquerors, she said. Her voice carried through the chamber, translated into 1,000 different languages. You expected us to punish you for your wars, to force you into peace at the point of a metaphorical sword. The chamber remained silent. Every being waited for the hammer to fall. Our ancestors could have done exactly that. They had the power to reshape the galaxy according to their will. Instead, they chose to sleep. They chose to give you 12,000 years to grow and learn and make your own mistakes. Emma paused, feeling the weight of billions of minds supporting her words. We will not betray their sacrifice. We are not here to rule you. We are not here to save you from yourselves. We are here to offer something different. Something better. Zenvox leaned forward, hope and skepticism warring in his ancient eyes. What do you offer? Emma smiled, and in that smile was the wisdom of 50 million years. We offer connection. We offer understanding. We offer a chance to truly know each other. Not as enemies, but as fellow travelers on this journey through the cosmos. The choice to accept will be yours. It always has been. The humans did not impose peace. They did not demand surrender. They did not threaten or punish or judge. Instead, they offered something that no empire in galactic history had ever offered before. They offered empathy. Chris Monroe had been an engineer before the awakening. He had spent his career building machines, understanding systems, solving practical problems. Now he found himself working alongside scientists from a dozen different species to create something entirely new, a network that could share experience itself. The technology is actually quite simple, he explained to his Valorian colleagues. Human consciousness naturally forms connections. We feel what others feel if we open ourselves to it. What we are building is a bridge that allows other species to experience the same thing. The Valorians looked skeptical. Their species had evolved for competition, not cooperation. The very concept of sharing emotions with outsiders felt unnatural to them. Why would we want to feel what our enemies feel? Asked senior scientist Kethra. She was the same ambassador who had announced the discovery of the Ark to the Council. Now she worked side by side with the beings her people had feared for 12,000 years. Chris thought about the question carefully before answering. Because your enemies are not monsters. They are beings with hopes and fears just like you. They love their children. They mourn their dead. They dream of peace, even while they fight wars. If you could truly feel what they feel, you would understand them. And understanding is the first step towards something better than war. The network was completed within 6 months. It was voluntary, completely optional. No species was forced to participate. No individual was compelled to connect. The humans made this absolutely clear. Choice was sacred. Freedom was non-negotiable. The first species to accept were the Crethians and the Zorath Collective. They had been enemies for 3,000 years. Their war had claimed billions of lives on both sides. Entire worlds had been reduced to ash in their endless conflict. Admiral Vethnor volunteered to be among the first Crethians to connect. He sat in a chamber aboard the Ark, facing a representative of the Zorath, a being whose species existed as a networked hive mind. Between them stood Emma, serving as a bridge. You will feel what they feel, she warned them both. Their grief, their anger, their fear, their love. Everything they have experienced in this war. Are you prepared for that? Vethnor nodded grimly. The Zorath representative pulsed with nervous energy. Emma closed her eyes and opened the connection. Vethnor gasped as 3,000 years of Zorath suffering flooded through his consciousness. He felt the terror of their colony worlds as Crethian warships descended from the sky. He felt the grief of mothers whose children were lost. He felt the desperate anger of soldiers fighting to protect their homes. He felt the hopelessness of generations born into war, knowing nothing but conflict their entire lives. At the same moment, the Zorath representative experienced Crethian emotions, the pride they took in their martial traditions, the shame they felt at atrocities committed in their name, the fear that drove them to strike first rather than risk annihilation, the deep, aching wish for peace that they could never admit to their own people. When the connection ended, both beings were weeping. The Crethian and the Zorath looked at each other with new eyes. Not as enemies, not as monsters, as fellow sufferers who had been trapped in a cycle of violence that served neither of their peoples. They signed a peace treaty that very cycle, not because they were forced, because they finally understood. Word spread. Within a year, over 200 species had participated in the empathy network. Wars that had burned for centuries ended in days, once the combatants truly felt what they were doing to each other. Borders that had been guarded with weapons and suspicion became open passages for trade and cultural exchange. The galaxy began to change. Slowly but unmistakably, Daniel Carter stood on the surface of a world that had been dead for 1,000 years. The Zorath and Crethians had fought over it so many times that nothing remained but ash and stone. Now teams from both species worked together to bring it back to life, planting seeds and rebuilding ecosystems. Emma joined him, watching the former enemies collaborate with quiet amazement. We could have forced this, Daniel said. We could have reached into their minds and made them stop fighting. Made them work together. Made them love each other. And it would have meant nothing, Emma replied. Forced love is not love. Coerced peace is not peace. What they have now is real because they chose it. A century passed. The galaxy continued to spin through the void, still chaotic, still unpredictable, still beautifully free. But something fundamental had shifted. Species that had once been enemies now built worlds together. Civilizations that had isolated themselves for millennia now shared knowledge and art and dreams. The empathy network had grown to include nearly every sentient being who wanted to participate. There were still conflicts. There always would be. Freedom meant the freedom to disagree, to compete, to struggle. But the wars of annihilation that had plagued galactic history became increasingly rare. It was hard to commit atrocities against beings whose suffering you could feel as your own. Humans walked among the stars as they had in ancient times, but not as rulers. They served as bridges, as teachers, as healers. They carried the burden of power that they refused to wield, and in that refusal, they became something greater than any empire. The sleepers in the Ark had been offered a choice. Some chose to wake and rejoin the universe, serving as guides for a galaxy learning to connect. Others chose to remain dormant, waiting for a time when they might be needed again. A few chose to let go entirely, passing peacefully into whatever lay beyond physical existence. Emma visited the Ark one last time, a century after the awakening. Her body had aged despite the genetic changes. Though she had lived far longer than any unawakened human could have, she stood in the great chamber where it all began, surrounded by the remaining sleepers. "Thank you," she whispered to them, "for the sacrifice you made, for trusting us to find our own way." The console in the center of the chamber glowed briefly, responding to her presence one final time. She felt a sense of warmth, of approval, of love that had spanned 50 million years. The final entry in the Galactic Council records, dated 1 century after the awakening, was brief but meaningful. Humanity showed us that true strength is not the power to control others, but the wisdom to connect with them. They did not end our wars. They taught us how to end them ourselves. In their restraint, they became the greatest force for peace the galaxy has ever known. Not because they were gods, but because they chose to be something better. They chose to be human. Emma smiled as she read those words. Somewhere across the vast network of connected minds, billions of beings smiled with her. The galaxy was not perfect. It never would be. But it was free, and it was healing. And for the first time in millions of years, it had hope. That was enough. That was everything.